Hello again. Welcome to the very last presentation on pragmatics, and this time around we'll be looking at Leach's theory of politeness. This politeness principle is a series of maxims which have been proposed as a way of explaining how politeness operates in conversational exchanges. Leach defines politeness as forms of behavior that establish and maintain comity, where comity is the ability of participants in a social interaction to engage in interaction in an atmosphere of relative harmony or agreement. You might remember the other definitions of politeness as were looked at in the previous topic on Brown and Levinson's theory of politeness. So, what are these maxims as contended by Leach? The first maxim under Leach's theory of politeness is what he calls the tact maxim. The tact maxim is oriented towards the hearer and has positive and negative submaxims. What are these positive and negative submaxims? 1. Minimize costs to the hearer and maximize benefit to the hearer. The operation of this maxim can be clearly seen in the context of impositives. For your information, impositives are utterances which have the function of getting the hearer to do something. The term impositive includes commands, requests, etc. So for your information, in stating his maxims, Leach uses his own terms for two kinds of elocutionary acts. He calls some assertives and the others impositives. So you should be able to know the meaning of elocutionary act at this moment in time, because we have already covered this under the topic speech act theory. What this maxim requires is that in order to get a hearer to do something which involves a cost on the part of the hearer, a polite speaker will say his utterance in a form which softens the effect of the impositive. That is, make it easier for the hearer to refuse. This can be done by increasing the optionality or by increasing indirectness. Thus, could you wash the dishes instead of wash the dishes? Because could you wash the dishes is giving chance for the other person, for the hearer, to deny or to refuse. The second instance would be, I was wondering if you could possibly wash the dishes. Now consider the following statement. I was wondering if you could possibly enjoy your holiday versus enjoy your holiday. Which one of the two is more polite? Obviously, enjoy your holiday sounds better. So, what do we note from this? For impositives beneficial to the hearer, the situation is reversed. And the stronger the impositives are, the more polite the speaker is. The second maxim that is put forward by Leach is the generosity maxim. This is actually a sister to the tact maxim and is oriented towards cost and benefits to the speaker. Remember, tact maxim had everything to do with cost and benefits to the hearer. This time around, it is cost and benefits to the speaker. And the submaxims go like minimize benefit to self, maximize cost to self. That means the maxim works in a way parallel to that of the tact maxim, except that the effects are reversed. Thus, let's consider this set of examples. Let me wash the dishes versus I was wondering if I could possibly wash the dishes. Which one of these two is more polite than the other? Remember, the generosity maxim says minimize benefit to self, maximize cost to self. So which one between these two is maximizing cost to self? Obviously, A is maximizing cost to self, and therefore, according to the generosity maxim of Leach's theory, it is more polite to say, let me wash the dishes, rather than saying, I was wondering if I could possibly wash the dishes. On the other hand, this maxim implies that requests for the benefit of the speaker be weakened. Let's consider these two sentences. I want to borrow your car versus could I possibly borrow your car? Where the maxim is saying requests for the benefit of the speaker be weakened. So, using this argument, which one between A and B is more polite? Obviously, you should be able to say B is more polite than A. Moving on to the third maxim, which is the praise maxim. The maxim of praise is oriented towards the hearer and goes as follows. Minimize dispraise of the hearer, maximize praise of the hearer. How is this to be done? As usual, negative politeness is more crucial, and hence the first submaxim is more likely to be brought into play. The effect of the first submaxim is therefore to tone down any criticisms or any unfavorable comments. Consider the conversation below. A asks, do you like my new dress? B answers, no. In a different conversation, where A has asked, do you like my new dress? B answers, well, yes, but it's not my favorite. Using the submaxim of minimizing dispraise of the hearer, we should be able to tell that the second response by B is better than the first response, because the first response does not respect the submaxim, which goes like minimize dispraise of the hearer. Or let's consider another example. A says, oh, I've been so disrespectful. B answers, yes, yes, I thought you didn't see it. In another instance, B says, no, not at all. Think nothing of it. Again, using this maxim, we should be able to tell that the second response by B is better than the first response. The effect of the second submaxim is to exaggerate praise. Remember, the second submaxim says maximize praise of the hearer. So how do you do it? The effect of it is to exaggerate praise. So you may say at a party, thank you so much for inviting us. We had an absolutely wonderful time. Even where you feel the organization of the party was not as perfect. The fourth maxim is called the modesty maxim. This is the natural partner of the praise maxim, and therefore, with this maxim, orientation is toward the speaker, with the relevant values reversed. That is, minimize praise of self, maximize dispraise of self. How is this to be? Praising oneself is inherently impolite. So, negative politeness here is a matter of toning down self-congratulation. Let's look at this example. A says, you did brilliantly. B answers, yes, you know that's characteristic of me. In another instance, C answers, well, I thought I didn't do too badly. You should be able to tell which one between B and C is being more polite. Obviously, C is more polite than B. Negative politeness, remember, is concerned with other people's need not to be intruded or imposed upon. Positive politeness is concerned with the need for inclusion and social approval. These terms were discussed in great detail in the previous presentation on Brown and Levinson's theory of politeness. Positive politeness, therefore, in this maxim tends in the direction of groveling, that is, humbling oneself. However, do not over-exaggerate humility. Consider the following sentence. Your Majesty, I'm a mere worm, a disgusting toad, a dog's tad, and I deserve no forgiveness. I throw myself at your Majesty's feet. While we are saying this maxim advocates for humbling of oneself, Leach is saying, do not over-exaggerate humility, because this statement that we are seeing is a clear example of over-exaggerating humility. The fifth maxim is called the agreement maxim. The maxim requires the following: minimize disagreement with the hearer, maximize agreement with the hearer. A typical strategy in this case is to begin with partial agreement before expressing disagreement. Consider the following conversation. A says she should be sacked immediately. We can't tolerate unpunctuality. B says, I disagree. In another instance, B says, I agree with the general principle, but in this case, there are mitigating circumstances. Again, using this maxim, you should be able to tell who is more polite than the other between the first instance of B and the second instance. Obviously, the second instance is much more polite than the first one. The sixth maxim is the sympathy maxim. The sympathy maxim has two sub-maxims. Maximize sympathy, which is expression of positive feelings towards the hearer. Minimize antipathy, which is expression of negative feelings towards the hearer. So this maxim renders congratulatory messages or condolences as inherently polite acts, because you are maximizing sympathy towards the hearer. The seventh maxim is consideration maxim. The sub-maxims here are as follows: minimize the hearer's discomfort or displeasure, maximize the hearer's comfort or pleasure. Negative politeness under this maxim involves the softening of references to painful, distressing, embarrassing, or shocking events, facts, or things. For instance, if someone's husband has recently died, it is more polite to say, I was sorry to hear about your husband, than I was sorry to hear about the death of your husband. Because the second instance, the second statement highlights that distressing event to a greater degree. There is no need to mention the word death. Rather, you'd simply say, I'm sorry to hear about your husband. Another typical manifestation of this maxim is euphemism. Consider the following. Somebody says, she has a lovely figure. The second person says, she has beautiful breasts. Which one of the two is more polite than the other? Obviously, the first one is much more polite, because the description in the second one would make others feel so uncomfortable. The same applies with the second pair of statements. One says he exposed his parts. The other one says he exposed his penis. Obviously, again, the second statement would make people so uncomfortable, and it is expected that people need to avoid using such sensitive words in a language. As way of concluding the discussion on the maxims, Leach proposes two more principles independent of this politeness principle. The first one is the irony principle. What does it say? The proposition here is that one can be superficially polite but bravely insincere, leading to politeness by implicature. Remember that implicatures are meanings or inferences that are derived on the assumption that speakers are being cooperative. We talked about this one when we were looking at the cooperative principle. Consider the following sentences. The first one goes, you are a fine friend. Let's say where somebody has just realized that his friend has betrayed him. The second instance is where someone has helped himself unjustifiably without invitation. Let's say at a party. You are not invited, but you've get crushed. You found yourself in, and the owner of the place says, "Ah, you're here. Do help yourself." Or another instance would be where somebody says, "Thank you very much," to someone who has poured soup on his clothes deliberately. So these are cases where somebody is being bravely insincere but superficially polite. The second principle is the banter principle. This is the opposite sort of the irony principle. Consider the following. Somebody says, "Look at what the cat has just brought in," referring to a person. Or somebody saying, "You stupid bitch," referring to a close friend who has just done something silly. So, as it has already been said, this is the direct opposite of the irony principle, because in these cases, somebody is being superficially insincere while indirectly being polite, because all these are said to close friends. What is important to note is that, like the cooperative principle, the politeness principle is intended to be universal in its application. However, the politeness maxims are given different weightings in different cultures. For instance, a British hostess will probably take a compliment on her cooking something like this, where guests say, "Oh, Jen, that was a delicious meal." Jen is going to say, "Thank you, I'm glad you enjoyed it." However, a Japanese hostess is obliged by politeness rules in their culture to deny any merit whatsoever in her efforts to entertain. Thus, Japanese culture gives more weighting to the modesty maxim and relatively low weighting to the quality maxim, since it is unlikely that the Japanese hostess believes that her meal is worthless. Again, it is important to note that not all maxims are equally important. For instance, tact influences what we say more powerfully than does generosity, while approbation is more important than modesty. Note also that speakers may adhere to more than one maxim of politeness at the same time. Often, one maxim is on the forefront of the utterance, with a second maxim being invoked by implication. And if politeness is not communicated, we can assume that politeness attitude is absent. This is where we end the content for the module, and I wish you all the best in your end of module exams. Thank you.